First off, before we begin, I'd like to thank everybody for coming out and taking this opportunity to make yourself aware and educate yourself. Anytime, and as Native people, anytime you're encountering a new person, there's knowledge to be shared, an experience to learn from. So I'd just like to thank you first off for taking this opportunity to educate yourself and and further your awareness of issues and concerns, and just making yourself aware of Native American history. And so it's oftentimes for a lot of individuals it can be very challenging. And so I just like to thank you for opening your mind that way and allowing yourself to be here. My name is Chris Begay, and I am the chair of the Committee of 500 Years of Dignity and Resistance. I am also the director of the Crooked River Dance Troupe and a singer with Elk Trail Drum, and a member of the Lake Erie Native American Council. And just go past that. Just with what I just mentioned, there's a lot just there. And to summarize everything, I mainly work with the Native community in just building community relations inside the community and outside the community. And what's being shown to you, if you could go back to that last slide, here are some names of different team mascots, and their use of names. As you can see, the first column is very, what I will mention though is that throughout this evening, I don't want anybody feeling like fingers are being pointed and blame is being issued out, because that's not what we're here to do. Like I just mentioned, we're here to educate and create awareness. There's a lot of the people in this room, the Native people in this room, and the people that are going to be presenting here today have a lot of knowledge of this stuff. So we recognize this, and all we're asking is that you recognize it as well. And what we have up here is facts and self-experiences, and that's a lot from what I speak from, is from my own personal experience growing up in the Cleveland urban area as a Native individual, and the other speakers are going to speak from their experiences as well. If you can go This is a really long presentation slide, and I usually use it when I attend classrooms or different universities and colleges. And it's usually a 45-minute lecture, or presentation, I should say. And there's a lot of number of reasons why we feel that the mascot issue is very important. And when to bring everything and try to define it in one sentence, it really the effects are from the way the Native people are perceived, how Native people are viewed. And all we ask is to be heard. And a lot of Native nations struggle to be heard. And I know that a lot of this information may be refed to you, but I also, like I mentioned, I'd like you to take everything that is said, and you may know it or not, but there may be a different aspect that you're actually going to see here this evening. With these slides, what the intention was with these traditional historic slides, what this is trying to represent is the actual history, Native American history, that often at times isn't placed in books or educated through means of public schools or universities or colleges. And oftentimes it's Native people that have to come into classrooms and speak in subjects about Native studies or diversity or just anything in particular about Native America. Often at times it's the Native that has to come into the classrooms, that has to do a lot of the educating. And growing up in the Cleveland school system, that's a lot of what I experienced. It was me having to explain who I was constantly, repeatedly, because there was no instructor or professor or teacher knowledgeable enough or had enough Native encounters with anybody indigenous to really understand the history. Every Native person speaks a different language, comes from a different background, practices different traditions and cultures, and so when you're in an urban area, there is a mixture of that Native culture, because the Native community that's being represented in this room right now are all from different areas throughout the United States, Canada, South America. They're from all walks of life. And so using stereotypical images as the Cleveland mascot is, it literally summarizes everybody in one definition. And just the term Indian in general isn't correct, because there's no Native American that claimed themselves to be Indian. I myself, as I mentioned before, I'm of the Dene Nation, and I don't consider myself an Indian, because that was a name forced upon the people. Indians are from India. So just for an example, there's an image portrayed about me, miseducated over generations of me being represented as an Indian. And yet that doesn't represent who we are. Not all of us wear feathers, and not all of us do the stereotypical things that you see demonstrated through fans at football games, at gatherings. That doesn't necessarily properly represent the people correctly. And just with the term Indian in itself is having an outside definition define who that individual is. So every Native individual has to go through that process of recognizing themselves either recognizing themselves along with mainstream society as an Indian, or as my case, for example, as a Dene, a person from the Dene Nation. When you're in an urban setting and you have a number of different indigenous nations as one community, that culture becomes hard to pass on those traditions, because you have a mixing of cultures happening. So you have to really start to recognize what you're actually doing and what you're actually saying when you're teaching and you're passing on these traditions. And those are some of the challenges, and like I said, I have a lot to say, and I'm trying to summarize it really, really fast, because I really want you to hear the words from the speakers. I want you to hear their message, because they can say it a lot different ways than I can. To give you a little bit more history about me, I started doing this style of work when the community asked upon me to take that responsibility, that role. In the community, they seen me as a good speaker, or somewhat, not right now, but good with explaining myself and really connecting with people, and having a different understanding and a way to explain it, because I myself was raised in two different worlds at the same time. I have two sets of parents. I have a white set of parents, and I have my native community, my native family. So I have that aspect as well, and I grew up in those two different households at the same time, So there's an understanding that I have that not many people have that experience of having. Because as I was learning two different ways all at once. And so I recognize a lot of things and a lot of the differences in the culture. And sometimes I can explain it better from an urban standpoint. Sometimes. Throughout Native history, there has been traumatic incidents after traumatic incidents, and mainly what it really focuses on is eliminating the Native culture. You'll hear stories about relocation, about boarding school, removal of Native peoples off their traditional lands, and all of these things result down to eliminating the Native from being Native. And again, with icons such as Wahoo, that again is trying to remove that Native, redefine that Native, to make that Native believe in another way, that it's okay to create a tolerance for people to stereotype, to discriminate, and to dehumanize. Because the Native people are here in this room supporting one another and anxious to have their voices be heard. And so, again, I'd like to commend you for taking this opportunity and coming here. We spoke to, and it may seem a little small, but over the past couple of weeks, we talked to over more than 7 classrooms, 7 here at just BW, a couple at Kent State. And so and just recently I attended this school meeting where they were changing their logo. So there's a lot of activity that's happening about this particular issue, and a lot of it just boils down to how that Native is perceived and if you're willing to let that Native voice be heard. And that's all we're really asking, because we understand a lot of what has happened and a lot of our own history, and all we ask is that you allow yourself to open up and recognize some of those oppressions and some of those inferior superior relationships where a culture is dominated and quieted and controlled by things like mainstream media and stereotyped through things like movies. Up here is a lot of different information, a lot of different, as you can see, a lot of different people being recognized. And you probably will not get to see the whole thing. But what I will mention again is that in the back there are folders of literature, of articles, of publications, and imagery that will give a prime example of what's being discussed here today and how it all relates to each other. The first guest that I'm going to introduce has pretty much already introduced himself, and so I'm going to ask Clyde Belcourt to come up and take stage and let you listen to a little bit of his words and his knowledge. And again, I thank you for coming out and showing your support. Also, while he's making his way up to the stage, I'd like to also mention that the Committee of 500 Years of Dignity and Resistance has written out a petition that's on the back table pertaining to the mascot, Chief Wahoo and the Cleveland Indians. And if you can, please step back to the table and help support the work that's being organized throughout the United States. And so if you could, not just, the petition is for local, but this work is east to west and north to south. So without further ado, I give you Clyde Belcourt.